You're okay. Hi everyone, second time round. My name is Sienna Perry from APNIC and welcome to the fourth and final Networking from Home event. Today we're celebrating Oceania. We hope that you're all happy, healthy and just busy enough. As we know, these events provide a place for network engineers and technical folk in the Asia Pacific to share their experience and expertise with peers, just like they would at a NOG event. Many of you know the drill, but for those who are joining us for the first time, presentations will be short and punchy and interaction is encouraged. We want to hear your questions, your comments, and if you're daring, we would love to see photos of you networking from home on Twitter or Facebook using the hashtag NFH, and there's some prizes for the best photos. Before I hand over to Jeff for the keynote, I'd like to remind you, please be mindful of the code of conduct. You can published on the NFH website and in the Q&A box. Want to ask a question or provide a comment, you can either use the raise hand function in Zoom and you will join the queue for a voice question, or use the Q&A button on Zoom for text and I will read out your question or comment to the speaker. We will have limited time for questions, however, so please make them good. If you don't get a chance to ask your question, you can email us at nfh@apnic.net and we'll forward the email to the speaker for you. Use Zoom chat for any questions you have about the event, about using Zoom, or any other issues that are not related to the presentations. More help is available on the NFH website. Now, enough of the boring bits. I would like to finally invite Jeff Houston to take the microphone. You there, Jeff?
I certainly am. And
fabulous.
Let me share a screen with you. Hi, and good morning all. Short and punchy. Well, let's see. I've got, 27 minutes and 83 slides. So this is a bit of a challenge. I want to talk about security this morning, or maybe I actually want to talk about what it isn't. I want to talk about insecurity. Now, I don't know about you, but I do online banking. And there was one bank in Australia that had an ad campaign at one point that said, which bank? Well, it was this one. It also happens to be my bank. And here's a web page of when I go to that URL, this is what I see. But how do I know it's my bank? What lets me know when I do my username and password thing that I'm actually talking to my bank and not someone trying to steal all my money? So I might hope it's my bank, but the issue is it's trivial for someone else to do, a mock-up of that screen and fool me into thinking it's my bank when it isn't. So how do I know that where I'm going to is actually where I want to go to? And that funny little lock icon is just a little icon. That doesn't denote much more, does it? So why do I know this is the real deal? Why should I enter my username and password? So let's go a bit further and go, what actually happened here? I started a DNS query. I asked for commbank.com.au. I got back an answer. The answer was, you need to connect to 23.214.88.32. For some reason, it's in v4. Now, when I look at that address, that's not the Commonwealth Bank. It's some address that has a reverse DNS lookup of Akamai Technologies. The Commonwealth Bank has a whole bunch of different addresses. And if you do a whois lookup, you'll find that they got addresses in 140.168 and 203.17.185. But that's not 23.214.88.32. 23.214.88.32 is an Akamai address. And, I might be a lot of things, but I'm not a customer of the Internet Bank of Akamai. So I'm going to something that's not the Commonwealth Bank, thinking it's the Commonwealth Bank. How do I know that it really is and not some dastardly evil scheme? And more to the point, how does my browser know that that's going on? And why should I trust my browser? I didn't write it. I have no idea what this browser does. Odd stuff, I guess. So why is this the real deal? And I suppose you could generalize this because it's nothing about my bank. In fact, it's actually a more fundamental question. In a communications network, you don't know who the other end is. And there are folk who wish to fool you that they're the real deal, and there's the real deal. How do you tell the difference between an intended truth and a dastardly evil lie? How can you spot the difference? Oh, and by the way, I did this over the web. So not only do I want authenticity, I want to speak to my bank and no one else's, but I actually want to keep my conversation a secret because I'm using radio waves, right? Anyone can listen in. So I want secrecy and authenticity. And I'm like every other user. This is not a lot to ask for. So how do I do it? Well, this is actually all about cryptography. And cryptography has a long and rich history. And the particular bit that's relevant to us is a relatively recent area, about 75 years old now, maybe a bit older, called public key cryptography. Now, this is an odd form of cryptography where when you encrypt a message using one key, you can only decode it with the other key. There's a very old cipher called the ROT13 cipher, where you take every letter of the alphabet and move it forward by 13 places. And if you do it again, you get back to the original message. So the ROT13 cipher is symmetric. But what if I used ROT12 and ROT14? I could encrypt with ROT12 and decrypt with ROT14. Equally, I could encrypt with ROT14 and decrypt with ROT12, but I couldn't use ROT12 twice or ROT14 twice. It wouldn't work. And this is exactly what's going on with public key cryptography. Messages encoded with one key can only be decoded with the other. But unlike the ROT kind of cryptography, simple, I actually want another property that if I tell you one key, you don't get to know what the other one is. Knowledge of one key doesn't infer knowledge of the other. And so I'm going to make one of these keys totally public. Anyone can use it, and keep the other one a closely guarded secret. It's me and no one else. So how do I do this? Well, I use maths, right? I don't want to go into this here, but basically it relies on the fact that taking an extremely large composite number, extremely large being hundreds of digits, and I form that by being the product of two large primes. So there's only one prime number factorization of this number. Knowledge of the number doesn't tell you knowledge of the prime numbers, and it's really computationally difficult to actually find out what those factors are. Now, oddly enough, in today's world, much of the foundation of internet security rests on this relationship. Prime number factorization still involves a technique of the sieve of Eratosthenes of around, 2,500 years ago. And it's about enumeration. You actually have to go through and count numbers. And if it's a really, really big number, 100 digits, you're going to be there for a while, no matter how fast your computer is. And this is a generalized challenge in cryptography. I need to perform a small amount of work to make the attacker take a huge amount of time to undo it. So I want to do just enough work to make the attacker's task infeasible. So anyway, let's just assume we can do that. Back to public and private key keys. You're going to send me a message. I have a copy of your public key. So you encrypt that message with your private key and send it to me, and I can decrypt it because I know your public key. But it's more than that. Only you have your private key. So if this message decrypts with your public key, you sent it. You. And you can't deny it. And those are two very, very useful properties. But there's one sort of assumption going on here. How do I know it's your key? Because I've never met you. I don't know you, whoever you might be. You're just a web camera on my screen. I have no idea who's behind that. I actually have no idea if this public key I'm using is yours or someone pretending to be you. So how do I get around this problem? And the way we do this is intermediaries, exactly the same way as public notaries do in the domain of paper documents. We have these trust points called intermediaries who actually do the hard work. They contact you, they validate your identity, they figure out if you have that domain name or not, they do some tests, and then they sign an attestation saying, this is you, and that's your public key. And they sign that with their own private key. Now, if I'm prepared to trust the intermediary, I'm prepared to trust everyone that they enroll, they validate. And the way they do that attestation is called a public key certificate. So I've got to trust the intermediary, and if the intermediary says it's you, I can trust that it's you through transitivity of trust, because naturally trust is transitive, right? Yeah, right. So let's have a look at what's behind that little lock icon of that bank that I'm worried about. When I click the lock and it says view the certificate, it sends me back this piece of text on the screen. And what it says is DigiCert have satisfied themselves that the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, located in Sydney, has control of the domain www.combank.com.au. Now, if I trust DigiCert, then I'll trust the fact that someone over there is using a private key that is matched with that particular public key. I'm talking to the Commonwealth Bank. Now, there are various kinds of public key certificates, and not all of them are the same. My own website, potteroo.net, I used a different certificate authority, and I didn't have to tell them who I am. So what comes out in the certificate is, here's potteroo.net and here's its public key. And I used Let's Encrypt, no identity. Now, you might think, well, maybe we all should have identity. Maybe we shouldn't. But let's do another little test. I'm going to give you 3 sites here on the screen. The bank, and down the bottom is me, and in the middle is APNIC, my employer. And I've used Safari and Chrome, but it's pretty much the same in many browsers these days. They all look the same, don't they? Can't tell a difference. Well, oddly enough, the first one was issued to an organisation called the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, located in Sydney, by DigiCert. The bottom one, we've already said, says, well, I don't know who got this domain, but whoever got it has control of it, and Let's Encrypt is willing to say so. So it says nothing about my identity. The middle one, wow. This certificate was issued to Cloudflare. The certificate says nothing about APNIC. It says, this public key belongs to Cloudflare. Really? So how do I know it's APNIC? Well, I don't. How do I know that APNIC and Cloudflare have an agreement? Well, I don't. Am I being fooled? I don't know. Because oddly enough, all of these different types of certificates coexist and present to the user in the same way. And that's not very good. But okay, the certificate system's a mess, and different kinds of validation present to the user in the same way. Oops. But TLS, the underlying framework of using that certificate to make a secure session, that still works, right? So here's TLS 1.2, basically, hello, key exchange, set up a session, off we go. Everything's encrypted. The way it does it is that you first send a certificate, this is my public key, and then the client says, well, let's establish a cheaper symmetric session key, and everything after that is now encrypted. So all of this relies on the fact that my browser, or the TLS engine inside the browser and inside the operating system actually, trusts that certificate. So the server sends a certificate, I trust it. So here's the public key, right, that got sent over as part of that TLS. And the real question is, how do I know it's the right certificate? Why does my browser think that certificate is valid? Because when I use a look here, it says, using a big green tick, this certificate is valid. So what? How did it know? Well, as we've said before, we used an intermediary. And in this case, the intermediary was DigiCert. It's actually a US company. But they were willing to say in a certificate that the Commonwealth Bank of Australia has control of this domain name, and they signed an attestation. So as long as I'm prepared to trust DigiCert, then I'm prepared to trust it's my bank. And why do I trust DigiCert? Well, they never lie, do they? But how do I know that? How do I know who DigiCert? I've never met them. I have no idea who they are. I actually have no idea about their business models. Why should I trust them? Why should my browser trust them? Well, if I then open up Keychain on my Mac, and you can do it in various other applications and other operating systems, you can actually get a list of all the people who issue certificates that my browser, my system, is prepared to trust. And there's DigiCert. That's a big list, isn't it? And that's only from C to G. I'm like, really? Well, the deal is that these folk are listed because they claim to operate according to practices defined by the CA Browser Industry Forum, of which they're a member. And all these people never lie. So let's just understand where we are. Someone, and I've never met them, paid someone else, who I'm also never met, some money, and I don't know how much. But the result of this, my browser trusts everything they've ever done and everything they're ever going to do in the future. Okay? Sounds great. But at some point, credibility becomes credulity. At some point, this gets stretched beyond breaking point. Now, this is an old screen snap a couple of years ago, and there was a Chinese trusted CA, CNNIC, and they issued certificates. They even issued certificates to the Egyptian Communications Authority. They even issued certificates about star.google.com, which got used as an intermediary to basically mimic Google and to conduct a man-in-the-middle attack. So CNNIC was thrown out of the trust list. You won't see them anymore because they lied. Well, you trusted them to never lie. They started lying. Just below there is our dear friends at Komodo, who a few years earlier got hacked badly, and private keys got posted on the net. Again, this is not working. So when we say they never lie, The answer is, well, hardly ever. Symantec, the ex-CA, got caught issuing certificates for example.com. I'm like, this is bizarre. If you look at these security blogs, you'll find all the time there are incidents. And sometimes these incidents get chilling. And we actually don't know what happens when security gets broken so badly, because at some point it's headline material about users being placed in peril. And that's not a good thing. Or other times it's just money, merely money, but a lot of it very quickly. So this is a problem. And the real question is, what's going wrong here? The real issue is that TLS handshake doesn't say which CA should be used. I might have gone to Let's Encrypt to get my certificate, but if DigiCert presents you with a valid certificate for Potteroo.net, how do you know it's the wrong CA? You don't. Your browser will allow any CA to validate a certificate. Awesome. Awesomely terrible. I'm like, here's a lock for your door. Don't worry, it looks great, but any key will open it. Great lock. Useless. So if anyone can issue a certificate for any name, then oddly enough, the whole system is only as strong as the weakest. And we trust a lot of CAs, literally hundreds of them. There's a report on this page about a number of different organizations. So all of a sudden, we're in a commercial environment where CAs are competing with everyone else for market share. And it doesn't matter how good you are, how resilient, how secure, how trusted, because the weakest CA defines the quality of the entire market. So it doesn't matter about quality. What matters is cheap. And cheap has some really unfortunate consequences. But that's okay. It's quite okay, because bad certificates can always be revoked. We can actually issue a signed attestation to say, don't trust that certificate. It's a bad one. And browsers always trust the revocation status of certificates. Well, not always. Some do, sometimes. Here's a test I did back in March, and it shows a number of platforms and a number of browsers. And I went to a website that had a revoked certificate. The only way you could get there was if you didn't believe the published revocation. The track record is not good. So revocation doesn't work. So, okay, we have a busted system that is cracking, wheezing, and groaning in every way. So how do we fix it? Well, option A, stop charging for it. Make it a cheap, useless commodity. And Let's Encrypt is going there. It's cheap, it's automated, it takes out all of the human factors. Does this make the network more or less secure? If I can hijack your domain name, I can get Let's Encrypt to issue a certificate for me, to be you. Great. So in some ways, security is no longer a luxury, but we devalue it at the same time. Well, how about instead, we stop the weakest CAs impersonating others? And Google does this in their Chrome browser. And if you look inside the Chrome browser, you'll actually find a set of CAs that can only be authoritative for Google's domain names, whitelisting and pinning. Now, it's not a bad idea, except that source code of Chrome can't list every single domain name. So Google can protect itself and no one else. Sucks to be us. Fine for Google, but still sucks to be us. So not a scalable answer. So the next issue is certificate transparency, which is kind of like the blockchain for certificates. And so what's going on here is that, as they admit, due to structural flaws in the HTTPS certificate system and issuing CAs, true, proven vulnerable to compromise and manipulation, true. So due to these reasons, what they're doing is forcing every certificate to be published in an open framework. And I'd say that's a fail. That's a complete fail. I'm like, this is same weak service in a nanosecond world. I'm like, cert transparency is worse than doing nothing. So when you get a really bad problem, what's the answer? Well, obviously the answer is the DNS. So if what we're trying to do is find the association of an entity with a domain name, and we already have that association in the delegation records, why not put the keys in there as well? Why not query the DNS for the hash of the public domain name, the public key of that domain name? Who needs CAs? Was this a kind of stupid invention? Now, the IETF worked on this in an area called DANE, domain keys in the DNS, and actually published some standards about how to put these public keys into the DNS. And so this way, when you do the key exchange and you get that public key, you can look up the DNS to say, is this the key that the delegation record was expecting or not? Well, all good, except you're trusting the DNS, and trusting the DNS is almost a tautology. We need DNSSEC because you've got to clean up the DNS. So, okay, let's now sign that in DNSSEC. So let's now have the DNS root key being the trust point here. If we can validate that TLSA record, we can validate the key, right? Well, not really. Because DNSSEC validation can be glacially slow, geologically slow. It's just slow, but not necessarily. We've actually been trying to do better things. And here's a 4-year-old RFC that actually talks about chain query requests, because we can bundle up all the DNSSEC answers and send it to you at once. Why bother asking the DNS? Why don't I bundle the entire TLSA material and staple it to the TLSA record to say, you don't have to trust your local trust set. If the DNS root key that you have a copy of can validate this, you can believe it. And so you can do this without any DNS, without any delay. But there's something more general here, and that is, this is a mess. The entire certificate system is about as secure as a tissue paper. It's hopeless, and it's continually compromised. We could do a better job. We could do a far better job if we actually used DNSSEC, TLSA records. We actually used DNSSEC validating resolution, even if we didn't need to use the DNS. We could staple that together and do a better job. But we've known about this for years, literally years, and we're more than happy for attacks to continue. We're not doing a better job. We're just talking about doing a better job. Why not? Change is hard. We have very, very different goals. Some folk make money out of being a CA. Why would they want the entire key business to disappear into the DNS? Because their money would vaporize. Other folk want to give points of control. Others, bad or good, want to exploit weaknesses in the current system. Not everyone has the same goal. We can make secure systems that are slow, and some users might value it, or we can make, well, insecure systems that are fast, and some folk go, great, fast is good, don't care about it being insecure. So with all of these different goals, change becomes incredibly hard. The system we have now is definitionally broken. It seems insane to me that someone has to study for a doctorate in network operational security to understand that the website they're going to really is their bank. That is a busted outcome. And somehow the simple objective has been absolutely corrupted by complexity and adornment. And the security folk have run rampant in doing insecure solutions. And that's bad. Because if you can't trust the way you communicate, if you can't trust the underlying mechanism for communications, you've got a complete dysfunctional mess. This stuff is garbage. We need to do something better. And the frustrating thing is we know what better is. We just can't all agree to do it. Thank you. I'll hand it back to Sienna.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And we've already got a question lined up. Jeff, what are your thoughts on bit squatting or domain fronting and the practicality of this with modern day processing?
You know, it's a great question. And there's an awful lot of bit errors that creep in. Some blame it on cosmic rays, whatever it is. The fundamental thing, and IDNs are very similar too, is that despite all of this technology, what you see is what you believe. And so that if I can make something look like what you expect, I can probably fool you. And all of this work in security hasn't really cracked, I suppose, the really big issue, that you've got to get away from what you see as what you believe into some fundamental relationship between this domain name is this entity in this role. This is why you should believe it. Now, DNSSEC alone can't do all of that heavy lifting. Bit squatting and similar creates a whole bunch of problems that what you think is where you're going to is not the real deal. IDNs do the same thing, where the same character presentation on your screen maps into a completely different domain name, completely different security system, completely different certificate, and I can fool you. So the system itself isn't robust and resilient. And quite frankly, that's a deep problem. The more we try and say certificate transparency solves all these problems, the more we try and say the web PKI works, stop throwing rocks at it, the more we say TLS is good enough, the more we blind ourselves to the fact that it's not good enough. It actually doesn't solve problems, and we shouldn't accept it as good enough. We need to do a better job.
Thanks, Jeff. So just a reminder, you can either raise your hand using the raise hand function in Zoom, and you can join the queue for voice questions and comments, or you can use the Q&A button on Zoom for text, and I will personally read out your comments or questions. But we do have another question from APNIC's Tashi. Is there an alternative framework to the current PKI framework, especially with regards asserting an ID authentication, given there are tons of root CAs not sure whom to trust, including auto-cert issuers like Let's Encrypt, whose verification is minimal at best, something that is straightforward with minimal overhead DNSSEC?
Well, this is, I suppose, part of the problem of what are you trying to prove? And if all you're trying to prove is that I am going to the domain name that I thought I was going to go to, and you're only trying to say, is that really potteroo.net? Then simple domain validated certificates from Let's Encrypt can potentially do that job. But quite frankly, Dane does a much better job. I'm going there because the DNS told me to do so. If the DNS contains the public key and I'm using DNSSEC, then I'm back to the single point of trust, the root key in the DNS. And as long as the root key is handled well, then I've got interlocking signatures that can reinforce the fact that this is really potteroo.net and not someone pretending to be potteroo.net. So if all you're after is domain name authenticity, Dane is a clear answer. The other part of the relationship is what the bank wants. What they want to do is not only say, this is my bank, but here is the name of the organization. Here is the entity that controls that certificate. Now, we go to www.apnic.net and believe it's the real thing, even though the certificate says nothing about APNIC. It says this is Cloudflare. That's broken. So what we need to do is establish identity relationships. Now, the real question is, should you load all that in the DNS with a single point of trust? Or should you create a complete second infrastructure called the web PKI, full of literally hundreds of folk who do things for money, who have entirely different motives, and you can't tell one from the other? The system underlying the web should never have promulgated for as long as it has. It's broken. It's broken because it's got too much trust, and the trust is not uniform. But the folk who are there refuse to believe that the DNS is a good alternative. And the folk in the DNS land look at the web PKI going, wow, you guys are broken. I'm not sure we have a clear answer, but that's the parameters of the debate. And for as long as the browser folk are sitting there in the CAB forum saying, we believe the web PKI is salvageable, nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change despite the fact it gets corrupted as a matter of course every single day. Wish I could be more helpful.
Jeff, we've got a very simple but effective comment from Mick MW. He says, I'm now storing my money under my bed.
Very true.
So if we know where he lives, then, you know, we can go.
He's in Canberra. Hi, Mick.
We do have another question. Do you see problems with how we manage RPKI CAs hosted at RIRs?
We've changed the single point of trust in the DNS and the many hundreds of points of trust in the web PKI to currently 5 points of trust. Now, in many computing terms, there's only three numbers: none, one, and zillions. 5 is an odd number. And if you trust 5, you'll trust 6. If you trust 6, you'll trust 7. And in some ways, I'm not sure it's the best answer from an abstract point of view of trust. Because again, you're trusting these folk for everything they do now and in the future. And could we have done this better? Well, DNSSEC said, I think this certificate system is rotten. I think it's hopeless. I think we can do a better job, and effectively did their security system without using X509 certificates. The RPKI went down the X509 path. It seemed like a good idea at the time. But I think it's reasonable to ask, is that really the best solution? Is this corruptible? Because if the addressing system is corruptible, we really have a problem. So yes, it's a good question, and we should be asking it and trying to find answers now and in the future.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Now I'm going to hand over to Dave from NZEGNOG, who is the chair for NFH Oceania and the moderator of session 1. Thank you, Dave.
Great, thank you, Sienna, and a big thank you to Jeff for being our keynote today. So we're now technical session 1. We've got 2 talks lined up as part of this session. And to kick us off, we first of all have Aftab, who is going to be talking about 3 years of RPKI in Australia and New Zealand. So thank you, Aftab, and over to you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Epinik. And thanks a lot, Jeff. That was an inciting discussion on the trust model. And I would say the same principle applies on the RPKI side as well. So let me start by trying to share my slide. Just give me 1 second. All right, now this is the right one, sorry. I hope you can all see that because the problem is once you start sharing, I can't see any one of you. So you have to make sure that if you have any question, moderator can just speak out loud. Then I'll start just now. So I'm Aftab Siddiqui. I work for the organization called Internet Society, and I'm part of the project called Manners, which is mutually agreed norm for the routing security. But right now, this is all about what we are doing in the Australia and New Zealand in terms of RPKI. So 3 years of RPKI in Australia and New Zealand. So the point is, why 3 years? Because the thing is, exactly 3 years ago, well, it was September in 2017, almost 3 years ago, I presented in OSNOG in 2017, and later, after a few months, in the NZNOG in 2018, in early January, about the status of RPKI in both countries and how ISPs are looking after the ROAs, and are they creating any ROAs, and what is their perception about the RPKI. Vendor support was minimum for sure. It's from the feedback I got, nobody was doing route origin validation at that time, and I believe so. It was too early for the RPKI at that time. Only the RIPE-NCC validator was available. At least that's what I know. Nobody else developed anything at that point, Routinator or OctoRPKI or anybody else. There was Dragon Research relying party software available, but most of the people were using and testing the RIPE-NCC validator. APNIC started the Ready to ROA campaign back in 2015. It was working really well, but if you look at the results, I'll show you later, it was not very satisfactory. Of course, it was a big task to encourage people to sign up their resources, but it was not there yet by 2017 and early 2018. So when I did that presentation, it was around, the ASN count in Australia was around 2,700. Today it's like 3,200, a big jump, more or less. 500 odd ASNs or network has been added into the AU domain. But at that time, or around 600-700 were not even visible in the routing table. And if I look it up right now, the number is more than 1,500. So there's a small chunk of ASNs working in the routing table from Australia. So this is the status from the 2017 presentation I did in OSNOG. There were around 211 valid ROAs, 22 invalid ROAs, and the biggest chunk, the 16,561, were not found at that point. But if you look at the graph from last year, the results are quite good, I would say. I mean, 15% is not amazing, but it's much better than what we had a year ago, right? So this is the graph from July 2019 to July 2020 up till 30th of July. The result shows that it's 15% valid. There are 85% unknown. It says 0% invalid, but there are 2 invalids I just saw yesterday before I was just finalizing the presentation. But of course, they are at the moment very insignificant in some cases. I'll explain. There are some people who are knowingly advertising invalids, and I'll explain who these people are. So it comes to New Zealand. Back in 2018, there were 635 networks in the routing table. Now there are 719. Not a big jump in terms of number, but looking at a small country, a small number of population, it's still a huge number. Almost 80% of the networks, the ASNs, are still part of the routing table. And that was the status back in 2018. So I mentioned that there were some data inconsistencies. The issue was I was taking the data from the RIPE NCC validator hosted at Internet NZ, and because of some odd reason, I couldn't get the nice connectivity to them, and I was dropping out quite consistently. But anyway, I was able to check most of the big operators on that day, and the result was there was no ROA from Spark NZ, Telstra Clear, which is now Vodafone, I believe so, Spark Trading, Snap Internet. There were none from all these operators. The only one which had the largest chunk of announced prefixes were the valid ROAs were Divoli at that time, AS45177. But that was not the best outcome of that RPKI status from New Zealand at that time. But if we do fast forward today, the result is not that good either. Spark NZ was none in 2018. Now they have 1% valid ROAs. Thankfully, they have 0 invalid. Vodafone NZ, which is 476A, is, again, they don't have any valid ROAs. Same goes for the Spark Trading 4771. They have 0% valid ROAs. So I'm not sure why they don't have it. If they have any concern, I would like to hear. Probably they have some something in the pipeline, or they want to do it sooner or later. But this is something I would like to understand as well, that what is happening. Then the overall result of New Zealand is not bad, I would say. Australia was 15% in total. New Zealand is 19%. Looking at the small number of size of operators in the country, I would say it can jump up quite quickly. Well, there is 1% of invalid as well. So just to sum up what is happening, when I presented back in 2017, you can see it was somewhere here in OSNOG and earlier in a couple of months here, and in Asia Pacific, the graph is going exponentially. So it's getting better. We are getting there. The only worrisome part I have is the red line. Sometimes it goes up and then it goes down. Right now it is going down. I hope it will remain. It will remain like this moving forward. Now that is the first part of my presentation, where I just wanted to share what is happening in these two neighboring countries. and how network operators are doing things in the RPKI domain. So what I did a small experiment. So this is the graph, which this is a small project which APNIC is doing, and Jeff Houston explained it in his blog post quite recently. According to the route origin validation from Australia is around 23.67%, and from New Zealand is 4.5%. But people, if the network operators are not doing not signing the ROAs, for sure they are not doing the validation as well. So I said, okay, fine, let's test what is happening in Australia at least, and then also in New Zealand. So what I did, I have a prefix and my own ASN, AS139038, and the IPv4 prefix. I only tested with v4, 103.138.210.0/24. So the best way to test is just delete the ROA. And I deleted the ROA. You can see the timestamp and the origin AS. I would say don't try this at home. It can have some negative consequences, and I'll show you how. So this is how it happened. I hosted my network at Volta, which is AS20473. They're based in Sydney, so I specifically use the Sydney data center, and they peer at the IX Australia. So I did all the tests from the Volta instances and try to see if I'm able to reach this advertised prefix. So able to reach this advertised prefixes, I needed something outside the network, and the best way to use in such scenario is RIPE Atlas probes. So I did all these measurements through RIPE Atlas probes. I did trace routes from around 120 probes in Australia and 40 probes in New Zealand. Trace route from probes hosted at 1221, 38915, and 4817. So 1221 is Telstra, 38915 is Superloop, and 4817 is Aussie Broadband. These are three big operators which announced that they do route origin validation. So bridgeability from Australia, of course, it's not an. I mean, it's pretty clear. The Virtutel, TPG, Sydney Uni, and Internode, they don't do any route origin validation. So they were all the probes hosted in these ASNs were able to reach the network I was advertising with a invalid ROA. They were able to reach it without any problem. But as I mentioned, Telstra, Aussie Broadband, and Superloop, when I deleted, so just look at the timestamp. I deleted the route origin ROA, valid ROA, at around 1:50 a.m. Australia Eastern Time. And I tested it at 2:20 almost. So between that time, they all dropped the invalid ROAs. Perfect. This is what I wanted to see, because they do advertise that they do route origin validation. But last night I said, okay, fine, let me test all these things once again. Surprise, surprise. Aussie Broadband started accepting all the the invalid prefix. But if you look at the trace, there's a massive difference. Same is the case with Superloop. So they were coming in with five hops each in case of Aussie Broadband and Superloop. And Telstra was only 2 hops away. But if I go here on this map, it says the Aussie Broadband is able to reach directly to 139.038. So apparently they do have a peering directly with 20473, which is Volta. And I'm just assuming that they are not doing the origin validation on that peering point. That's my assumption. And on the other hand, if you look at the Superloop, it is taking around 23 hops to reach my network, which is again is in Sydney, and of course Superloop is in Sydney as well. So they are going all the way somewhere in US, and it's the NTT network which is handing over to Volta network. So again, it is not connecting from within the Australia. It is going somewhere else in the world and then coming back through a peering point which doesn't filter the invalid ROAs. And when I said don't delete your valid ROAs, it can have negative consequences. This is a negative consequence. So you can see the diagram on the left. When I deleted the ROA, there was, of course, massive announcements, blah, 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 and then a lot of withdrawals. But after 2 hours, there were more withdrawals. But if you look on the right, picture, AS6939, which is Hurricane Electric, dropped the invalid. Now, it is not clear if they actually, why they took 2 days to filter that, but apparently they did. So, so they do have route origin validation, but it wasn't immediate. I mean, you can still go and check all these diagrams and route maps whenever you have time. The prefix, the route origin, I still have the invalid ROA, so you can verify all these things. Moving forward, I went to the IX Australia New Zealand route server, and they said that they are doing the prefix I am advertising is now marked as filtered. And if you look at the routing.he.net, they also marked is as filtered. So at some point, they all filtered it out. So that's why the results were a bit inconsistent. It didn't happen right away, but it happened after a couple of days, and in many cases, more than 3 days. So that's the case for the Australia, right? So if you have an invalid ROA, your customer's gonna be yelling and screaming at you at some point, not today, not tomorrow, maybe after a couple of days. But this is the case with New Zealand. So I checked most of the big operators, Snap, Spark, Vodafone, and Auckland Uni. Of course, they were all able to reach without any problem. Anyone able to not reach from New Zealand? Well, not everyone able to reach the invalid prefix I was originating, which I'm still originating. But the good thing what happened is, as I mentioned, I'm using Volta, and Volta is also quite aggressive in terms of filtering and all that. And this is the email I got after 2 days. And they said, well, FYI, you have a route, you have an invalid ROA, and you make sure that you create a valid ROA. And then another message I got from them that they will stop advertising this prefix if I don't fix it in next 24 hours. So it's not a bad news at all. So people are taking initiative. They are taking time, and I don't blame them, because if they stop advertising it right away, it can create problems. So the map is simple. This is ready to ROA campaign. I'm just gonna promote. Create ROAs, make sure that you keep on reviewing it, install RPKI validator, test origin validation in the lab somewhere within your network, implement route origin validation in transit pairs, drop invalids. You don't have to do it everything in one day. And since I represent Manners project, I would say these are the 4 basic principles of the Manners project. Make sure that you do filtering, anti-spoofing, coordination, and global validation. And 4th part, which is the global validation, actually emphasize on the RPKI. So this is my short presentation. If you have any more questions, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Aftab. So as we mentioned, Aftab is looking forward to taking questions. If you would like to put them in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and you can ask them yourself. We do actually have a quick question that's in the chat, but I do ask people to put it in the Q&A if you'd like it read out. Aftab, can you really quickly explain the reason you set your ROA to AS0?
Yeah, so I mean, if people know me very well, that I'm a big proponent of AS0 ROA, because there are two reasons. Number one is it automatically makes any other announcement invalid, because AS0 ROA exists. Any other because you cannot originate any prefix from AS0. So any announcement for that prefix originating from any other ASN all of a sudden becomes invalid. So that's why I created an AS0. I create AS0 for all the prefixes I have. So this is what I did. In fact, for this test, I also created another ROA with a dummy AS number, which I can do because I'm the holder of the prefix, just to make sure that if something goes wrong with AS0 ROA, there is still a candidate for another invalid ROA. But anyway, the AS0 did work, so there was no problem.
Thanks, Aftab. We've got a comment from Tashi. This is for both Aftab and Jeff. Would it make for a much simpler deployment and uptake if we had ROA to IRR conversion to populate a vanilla authoritative database, and people can filter it based on these IRR objects without need for deploying validators, given the issues we know about inconsistent VRP outputs?
Okay, if I put my operator hat on, I'm not an operator for the last 3 years or so since I joined ISOC, but I run my own infrastructure. You can see these prefixes are my own. I would like to see that. Yes, it will make life easier for a lot of people who are still reluctant to join the ROV bandwagon. But I'm not sure how it is going to happen. We still have, so I can tell you one thing. Even after I deleted my route object, I deleted the valid ROA, there is a entry in RADB against my AS number for the prefix, which I can't delete because I don't have any relationship with RADB. I have to talk to them. I never created that. It just ended up there and it's still there. So this is one thing we need to fix before we can go ahead and try to do something similar on those lines. If it shouldn't be there, but it's there.
Aftab, we've got Jeff with his hand raised. I'll just unmute him. 1 second. Why is that not unmuting? Can you unmute it? There we go. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Let's try that again. Okay. I think it's a bad idea, Tashi, and I think it's actually a terribly bad idea. These systems are complex, and any system that's complex with many moving parts exposes vulnerabilities in operation. If you're basically creating a security framework where there are two different sets of inputs, IRRs and sort of all this RPKI ROA attestations, you get interaction such as Aftab was describing with RADB. And it gets much, much harder to understand why something is valid or why something's invalid when the variety of inputs is beyond your control and immediate purview. So my recommendation is keep it simple. We are not trying to resurrect the Internet Routing Registry system. This is a different system with a different purpose. It doesn't do some of the things that IRR does, nor should it. It does something different. I would say don't cross the beams, because as soon as you do that, you're just creating operational complexity and no one wants to do it anymore because it's all too complicated. So my advice is don't do it. Thanks.
So we've actually got quite a few questions queued up, and I'm going to close the queue for new questions. But Tim Warnock asks, Tim from AS38195 here, looks like a router in HKG has an incomplete ROA database from 2 separate servers cleared and is recovering now. Any comment, Aftab, or is you going to take that as a comment?
No,
Sorry.
I would say this is something we all should learn. We also that Telia incident as well. They explained it very well to the community as well. And this is something from 38195 is amazing. There will be some technical difficulties, technical issues. If we know what is happening, so that we don't replicate the same problem, or if we encounter the same problem, we know how to fix that easily. That's great. If you can share those details, that would be great. Thank you so much for that.
So we have a question, and I apologize for incorrect pronunciation. Marinho Barcelos, how do you know if an AS is using ROV, and how is it using depreferencing or filtering?
So there were two things. So I started with the list which Jeff created. So you can go to the stats.apnic.net and the details are there. As Jeff explained, he's doing something similar, but he's running the test multiple times, like multi-million times. That's what he said, tests per day. Of course, I can't reach that point. But the only problem, so I picked up the top 10 from that list because I still need to understand how TPG is marked as some 40% and I didn't get any I got all the traffic coming in from TPG for this invalid route. So the list is there, you can figure it out, and then they all announce it quite publicly, like Telstra, Superloop, and Aussie Broadband. They announced it on the AusNet mailing list that they do route origin validation. So you can check it from there. But of course, if you have RIPE Atlas probes and you have access to their measurement portal, you can run your own test like the way I did it. There are prefixes from Cloudflare, which is announced, and they do, is BGP safe? I'm not pronouncing that, but Google it. Is BGP safe yet or something? They do all these tests as well. So you can figure out if ISPs are doing route origin validation or not.
Aftab, final question from Muzama. Hi Aftab, what happens if someone accidentally misconfigures his ROA containing someone else's prefix?
So you can't create a ROA with somebody else's prefixes, but you can create a ROA with your own prefix with somebody else's ASN. That is possible. At least the APNIC portal will not allow you to take somebody else's prefixes because you can't. They will only give you the option of the prefixes you manage. But of course, the way RPKI works, you can create a ROA with any origin AS. And I have seen this problem where people mistyped their own ASN because then it doesn't tell you if the origin AS is right or wrong, because you can actually, I can create an AS, origin AS for anything. And if you look up my prefix, you will find out there are multiple origin AS I have created just for testing and just to show this to community. You cannot use somebody else's prefixes, no, but you can use somebody else's ASN. So yes, that still makes an invalid ROA.
Superb. Thank you so much, Aftab. And I'm going to invite Dave back to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Aftab. That was really good. And obviously here in New Zealand, we've got a bit of work still to do on our validation of ROAs. So next up, we've got Shaman Reza, and he's going to be talking about his journey with the APNIC honeypots. So over to Shaman.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, APNIC, for giving me the chance to talk here. I hope this is simple. Okay. Before I begin my presentation, I want to share a quote from Mr. Donald Rumsfeld from his book, Known and Unknown, a Memoir. There he has mentioned three different phrases. One is known, another one is known unknown, and the third one is unknown. The unknown refers to those things which we really don't know, And today's talk is about what can we do to find out those unknowns. As Dave said, this is me, Shamim Reza. I'm from Bangladesh. I work for the largest ISP in Bangladesh since 2009. It was my first interview and first job. My responsibility is to take care of the infrastructure security nowadays, and I am heavily focused on that. As the title says it, but let me tell you today's agenda. I will be talking about a little bit about honeypot, its background history, my background history of connecting with APNIC honeypot, and what I have experienced since this April with this honeypot project. The idea of honeypot was begun in 1991 with two publications. One is Cuckoo's Egg and another one is An Evening with Breford. In Cuckoo's Egg, Mr. Stoll shared his experience of catching a computer hacker who was searching for secrets in his corporation. And in An Evening with Breford, Mr. Bill has shared his experience of a computer hacker's movement through his traps that he and his colleague used to catch that hacker. Actually, those two writings were the beginnings of nowadays honeypot, and the first of its kind was released in 1997, which is called Deceptive Toolkit. And in 1998, the first commercial honeypot came out, which is called Cybercopy Sting. For me, the interest was began at BDNOG 1 conference back in 2014, where Adli Wahid, the senior internet security specialist from APNIC, showed us how honeypot works and what an attacker do when he gets the system access. In the meantime, 6 years gone, I was studying some other things, so many things, and doing some projects. But then again, I meet Adli Bhai in Apricot conference in Melbourne in February 2020. And again, he has shown me the updated APNIC honeypot infrastructure, and I got excited again and showed my interest to host one of them at Link3. That is it. Link3 has hosted APNIC honeypot as a part of our ongoing SOC project. If we search for a definition of a honeypot, then I must quote the statement of Kaspersky Lab. They have defined honeypot as a sacrificial computer system that is intended to attract the cyber attacker like a decoy, so that we get to know how the hackers are operating, what they have been doing. There are three types of honeypot. All of them are based on interaction, and we have choose to host Cowrie honeypot, and the developer of Cowrie, Mr. Michael, has mentioned that it is a medium to high interaction SSH and telnet honeypot, which is designed to log brute force attacks and the shell interaction performed by the attacker. Now, why we need honeypot? Nowadays, the attackers, or what we call the hackers, never sit back and use the same tactics and techniques again and again. They change it. They change their strategies so that they can expose the defense system or the targeted one. So we want to know the current methods, the trends that has been used by them, so that we can train our security team how the attack and attacker works, their movement patterns, and so many things related to it. And why do we want to do it? Because we want to take necessary measures to harden our network security and stop devastating attacks, or in a simple word, make the hacker's action painful. This is statistics that I have got from APNIC dashboard. We have crossed almost 100 days with the APNIC honeypot, and more than 11,000 unique IPs that has gained access to this honeypot, where I have seen that 2 script was downloaded, and there were 35 public IPs that has gained access to this system, which are from my own network. Basically, they are being used by our corporate customers, and I'll be telling more about those things in my next couple of slides. Here I have mentioned about two botnet. One is a gold brute and another one is lemon duck PowerShell. After 1 month, I was actually looking for some extra data, and I set a logic to get all the connection information that was directed to my honeypot, and my NetFlow server has given me this. So uh, for some clauses, I have changed the IP addresses, but the event is real. So after seeing these patterns, here you can see these like the port, the IP was the same, and they are scanning the honeypot IP with this particular ports, whether it is open or not. So I took help from Google about this type of activities, and found few articles in Sophos. So they are telling me that gold botnet that affected any device and is scanned for open RDP port, and they are grow by it. And this was actually discovered by Mr. Marinho from Morphos Lab. And another one is the Lemon Duck PowerShell. This campaign scans for the open port on these particular Windows services. So after this, I made a list of those private IPs, and but the problem is these are our home user, and it is really tough here to let them know and convince them what is happening and what they have to do. But we are planning to run a awareness campaign for it. Now let's go back to those scripts. I copied those URL, those two URL, and those are quite interesting. When I search it in Shodan, it gives me a bunch of vulnerabilities related to these IPs, and these all these ports are open there. So with this info, I can easily tell that this IP is definitely a part of something big. Then I search the reputation of it. I need to know, because I need to know the history behind this IP, what other people are saying. Is it new or the old one, or what kind of activities it is doing to others. Um, and I found that this IP is reported for many different activities from many different regions around the world. And as well, the URL host says that it carries the malware. But I checked it a few days later, so I didn't get the chance to download that script. Now I have followed the similar steps for the second script. This one is the second one, but finally I check it with a hybrid analysis to get more of it, and the output says says that it is a backdoor, and it has been used for a geographically distributed DDoS attack infrastructure, which was actually discovered by Kaspersky Lab. Uh, Till now, I have talked about my home user IPs. Those are scanning for some open ports into my honeypot. And after that, I have covered what steps I have followed when I saw those scripts. Now, I'll be talking about a story that that was kind of a little bit stressful, but funny at the same time. Uh, when I when I get alert from Slack, I do follow some steps to get some additional associated information. Uh, I ran in map scan to get what port and services are open there associated with that particular IP. I search for DNS queries into my DNS server. Is there any pattern? What sort of domain name it's been querying? Uh, I search for our client. I search in our client database that how much bandwidth he's using, which company it belongs to, and etc. The tricky part is to convince the client, because my target was to get net flow or packet capture from that respective devices. After collecting all this information, I analyze them to find out the story behind it, and based on the device criteria and some other things, we recommend some best practices to those respective clients accordingly. Now, this table shows the statistics of devices that are being used to access our honeypot, and most of them are MikroTik router. Our primary investigation tells us that these devices are being compromised because of backdated firmware. Now let's watch a horrible story on the next few slides. Few weeks back, I got alert from Slack, and I let my customer support team know that they had to work on a particular client. So I tell them the steps, and they are that was so easy to follow on. 2 days later, I got the same alert from the same IP, and I knocked the CS team again to work on it. What happens? Tell me more. What is going on? And I didn't get any answer from them. But one day later, just after one day, I got the alert again, and then I called the engineer who was responsible for that actions, and whether I was asking him that whether he has worked on it or not. Then he replied that on the second day, the client IT concern replied that I am a CCIE and I know what is going on inside my network, so you guys don't have to bother me again and again. The challenges begins for me at that time when I heard that, because it is really hard to convince this type of naive people. So I need to collect some data so that if he comes out so adamant, this data will help me to convince him. So I run Nmap scan and got that this is a MikroTik router and with a backdated firmware. Then at the same time, I have set a logic at my NetFlow server to get some additional associated information. And after a few moments, when the NetFlow start giving me the output, I saw something like this. So here I fake the source IP, but the destination IP is a real one, and the event obviously a real one. So this this particular part doesn't look okay to me, and this is not cool at all. This MikroTik router is not supposed to listen to 80 port to an outsider IP. So I took that particular IP and search for reputation, and what AbuseDB and CleanTalk database has given me is not good at all. Actually, it was worse. This IP was reported more than 600 times for different sort of attack. At the same time, I got some comments from the Epinic dashboard. I was curious why the hacker has executed this type of comments. So I took help from Google again and found one article at Sands Institute for the same kind. And they told me that any hacker executes this type of commands to find out if the system is a decoy or not. So I have got what I need to talk to him. The other day I called him and the conversation was lasted more than 15 minutes, and we were talking blah 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 blah, and finally I managed to convince him that he's not responsible for any actions, and we are here to help him. So there is nothing to worry, but there is something bad is happening. But eventually I didn't get any net flow or packet capture data from him, so we only have options to monitor the activities of that IP. But the update is since last week after I talked to him, I didn't get any hit from that particular IP. So the benefit was we had our network traffic analysis in place 2 years before. We have our central log system, we have our monitoring system, but what Epic Honeypot gave me that the any direct info of which IP or its associated internal LAN is compromised. So we get the chance to know it and take necessary measures to mitigate any problem or resolve those problems. When we get any alert, as I said before, we do inform and guide our client to secure their belongings. Another thing, Epic dashboard is using ELK stack, so that is more convenient to search and see any statistics, and the infographic dashboard gives a greater view, like which region is performing the most attack. Obviously, if I calculate the ASN part, link fee itself is the top one, but the second one is China as a country. Though we are using Cowrie, it is only for SSH and Telnet service, but still the logs gives me some meaningful information to study on, and it really helps to take a few steps to secure any network infrastructure or system infrastructure. This is all. I hope you enjoyed. Is there any questions I would like to answer? Thank you for listening me.
Thank you so much, Shamim. As you said, we're open now for questions before we go to the break. Just a reminder, you can either raise your hand and I will unmute you and ask you to ask your question by voice, or you can go to the Q&A panel and add in your question or comment there, and I will read it out for you. So I think maybe we'll give it another couple of seconds to give people the opportunity to ask a question. We're going to take a 10-minute break soon, so everyone can grab a bit of lunch. Here we go. Jonathan Brewer's got a question. Sorry if I missed this. What IP space is the HoneyNet run on?
Sorry, Sienna, can you please come in?
Shamim, Jonathan Brewer asks, sorry if I missed this. What IP space is the HoneyNet run on?
Oh, okay. HoneyNet is actually Epic honeypot project, and Linktree has hosted it as a part of that project. That's all. And we have hosted honeypot into our network in an isolated place, so that so we want to make sure that our existing system infrastructure won't affect from that.
Super. We actually have in the chat a link to an APNIC blog post about the HoneyNet project. We also have a nice comment from William Tibbin saying, thanks Shamim, great presentation. And the question, which we might make our final one, from Mavelico, I'm sorry if I get that wrong, is honeypot an essential part of a network, or we need to go through APNIC?
Okay. Basically, as I mentioned earlier, that I heard about honeypot in 2014 from Adli Bhai. That time I was get excited, and I was always get excited when I see any new things. Regarding to your question, honeypot was actually a sub part of our SOC project that we have been working on since this March. It is really not necessary to host a honeypot into your infrastructure, but if you want to know the unknown one that I have mentioned earlier, quoting Mr. Donald Rumsfeld statement, if you want to know the unknown one, and if you are so interested to know what hackers are doing, what steps they are following, what the technique and tactics are there, what are the new things they have been using, then I must suggest to use a honeypot into your infrastructure. And for being with Epic, And APNIC HoneyNet project, it is really a cost effective. I didn't had to spend any penny to host this system other than contributing one of our VM host, and because APNIC is giving me the dashboard. So from there, I get the necessary information and all the logs and all the statistics. So if you want to explore the security domain, you can go with Honeypot. It is really interesting, and obviously it will help you to get more out of it.
And we do have one last question from Subrata. I think they're very keen to ask you a question. You can, I'll unmute you. Can we unmute Subrata? Won't be a moment.
Just maybe his for the
Subrata, if you can unmute yourself and then you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you for the sessions. My query is if any network can be implemented in their own network. So how can they implement it in their own network, the honeypot, and how can benefit from the honeypot?
Okay, this is pretty simple. First of all, you need to make a strategy. Like there are some best practices to host a honeypot. You can host it either by yourself, or you can take help from APNIC, be a part of APNIC HoneyNet project. I see being a part of APNIC HoneyNet project is more convenient rather than hosting by your own. And you can host it inside your infrastructure, but make sure that your other host or other systems or other infrastructure, your production infrastructure, won't affect by it. So try to make sure that you put it on an isolated place or on a separate VLAN, as I can say, if I simplify it. And as I mentioned that with Honeypot, what I gain, I get to know the unknown things definitely in last 4 months. Though it is not enough, because Kauri is only for SSH and Tailnet, and it only gives me the brute force information and only the interaction of the hackers. So I get only 2 adversary scripts. But if I see the broader picture, because of this honeypot, I get to know that some part of my infrastructure is responsible for some botnet infrastructure, and some IPs are directly affected by the hacker. So I came with an idea that I can help out my corporate customer to secure their infrastructure. So maybe it can give me a value-added service. So it can give a business opportunity for me to work on security. But if you are a enterprise organization, you can host it with APNIC honeypot, definitely. I will suggest not to buy your own, because hosting a honeypot is really a scary thing. But if you know the basics, if you follow the basics, if you have strategies exist in your policy, then it is easy. Hope this answers your questions.
Okay, thank you for my answer. This is a free or this is paid option?
This is obviously free. You have to get more information. You can connect with Adli Wahid, the senior internet security specialist. He's the lead of the APNIC HoneyNet project. So he will tell you more about it.
Thank you so much, Shamim. We do have 2 other questions, and I'm going to ask those people to email nfh@apnic.net, and we will get you the answers to those questions. Okay. And I do also suggest that you have a look on the APNIC website, and specifically the APNIC blog under the tag HoneyNet, and there's some really good information there for you. So thank you again, Shamim, and thank you, Dave, for being the moderator of this great session. We're going to take a 10-minute break now. And when we come back, we have presentations on queue analysis in the data plane and hardening product, sorry, just one second. Production Linux infrastructure, plus our panel on the rise and rise of IXPs. In the break, why not take a photo of yourself networking from home and share it with us on Facebook using the hashtag NFH. Welcome back, everyone. I'd like to hand over to the moderator of the next session, Washif Ahmed from IAA. Over to you, Washif.
Hey, thanks, Sienna. And thanks to all the speakers of the first session, Shamim, Aftab, and Jeff. We are moving on to the second session of the event. We have 2 talks lined up for this session. The first one is from Shaki Shen. He's a PhD student in Princeton, and his talk is on queue analysis in the data plane. Over to you, Shen.
So thank you very much, Rashid, for introduction, and thanks APNet for providing me the opportunity to share our work on queue analysis. So I'm Xiaoqi Chen from Princeton University, and today's talk is about Conquest, our project about queue analysis in the data plane. This is a joint work with Technion and AT&T. So today's talk is about something everyone hates, well, which is long queues. Back in the old days when we're still waiting to fly to everywhere in the globe, where we missed old days when we were traveling, we still hate about the long queues in the airport. Similarly, when we call Uber and have to wait for half an hour to get a ride, we are also waiting in the queue and we hate it. The queue here is not physical, it's virtual. It's in the server, so a lot of people is waiting for Uber rides. Or when we are watching a video, soccer live streaming video, and suddenly it started to buffer, we hate it. Well, this is a different queue. It's the packets carrying the video data waiting in the queue in the network. Let's give a quick recap about what's happening in queuing inside routers. We have a few ingress ports to the same router, and we have the different egress ports. After packet coming into the switch or router, there's a routing decision to say which egress port it should go to. And then there's a crossbar that brings the packet to the corresponding egress port. And then there are the queues. Let's look at one egress port for now and assume we only have one particular queue for our port. So say that when 2 packets come into the switch and they're routed to the same egress port, we have to put them one by one into the queue because they have to go out one by one at the same port. So queues are necessary for us to achieve packet switching and statistical multiplexing. We all know that. However, once we have the queues, we may end up with very long queues. So imagine we have a burst of packet coming in. They all want to go to the same egress port. So they have to line up. And now the queue is kind of full. So for the next packet, we want to go to the same queue. Well, we can't really go there anymore. It's full. So this packet may get dropped. So when queue gets full, packet get dropped. If this packet is carrying the data for a favorite soccer game, the live streaming data is lost. So we have to rebuffer and send it again. Oh, that sucks. Even before the queue is full, we already have a long queue, means we have a higher latency. So the online game players may already suffer from a lagging experience. So basically a long queue is not good for us. We know that long queue is bad for interactive applications such as gaming or watching live stream because of the delay and jittery cost. Today, I want to focus on a very interesting phenomenon called microburst. If we plot the queue length over time on this plot, here we show that the queue length over a day. We can see that in most cases, the queue is pretty short. However, in a very rare cases, we see the very, very long queue. And we call this microburst because this phenomenon is really, really short. After a millisecond or so, the queue will go back to normal. But within this millisecond, the queue is very long. We may have packet drops. We may have high latency, high delay, high jitter, etc. Microbursts exist in data center networks. And we roughly know one of the reasons. It's called incast. If one server sends a request to many different servers, and receive many different servers reply simultaneously, we may have this queuing issue. However, if in data center networks, we kind of know how to solve it. Just let every server make sure they don't create incas. However, it also exists in carrier networks, and we don't know the reason yet. In fact, this figure actually comes from one of the AT&T's core routers in the network. Supposedly, there's no incas in carrier networks. Even worse, unlike data center network, where we could use the servers or the virtual machines to let them behave themselves, in carrier networks, we can't really control the behavior for the hosts, like phones or tablets or laptops inside the network. We cannot use hosts to monitor or mitigate the microburst. So we have to use our routers. Still, the traditional routers in our network only give us very limited visibility to microbursts or queuing issues in general. They only give us very coarse-grained statistics. So for example, this particular Cisco router in our network only gives us statistics for once every second. So this one data point corresponds to a second. By the time we see the statistics, it's already too late. Remember, microbursts last only 1 millisecond. So the harm is already done. When we see the microburst, the video players or the game players or the live stream watchers are already unhappy. Fortunately, today we have a new technology called programmable switch. We could use a language called P4 to write some small data plane programs that execute directly inside the programmable switch. So it processes each and every packet. If we use it for measurement, it allows us to have real-time and fine-grained queue measurement analytics. So today we present Conquest. Its algorithm basically try to answer the question, why am I waiting in a long queue? Or more precisely, if the queue is really, really long, which flow has many packets in the queue? Imagine we have an empty queue and the first packet comes in. We can define a flow ID for this particular packet. For example, we could use the source IP address and destination IP address. Now say we have a burst. So a bunch of packets come into the queue. It becomes really, really long. We have a high delay. This white packet may wonder, why am I waiting for so long? Why the delay is so high? Well, this packet itself may not know. But if we look at the God's view, so a clever Smurf may show up and say, hey, I check everything for you. It's because flow B. Apparently, over a half of the packet in the queue belong to this particular flow. It's just like we are waiting for Uber and you really don't know why you're waiting for half an hour, so you're frustrated. And the Smurf can tell you, hey, it's because the NBA game's in town. So everyone just calling Uber when they come out of the NBA game. Knowing the reason, we might do better. Well, maybe just don't fly to Bay Area next time after the NBA game. Or more precisely, if you know the queuing issue is happening, you can do something for flow B's packet. For example, we could reroute it to a lower priority queue, or maybe we can start with ECN it, or maybe drop it. Here, let me give a very high-level overview about the Conquest data structure. It's a very technical stuff, so I don't expect everyone to understand, but if you're interested, you can refer to our paper. So basically what we did is we sliced traffic into very small time windows and used many snapshots to record them. So one snapshot will record one time window. It will record that, for example, for each flow, what's the size in this time window? For each packet coming out of the queue, we will write this packet to the latest snapshot. Basically tell them, please add 1 to the size of this flow ID. It will also try to read a few past snapshots. So for example, if right now we're writing to snapshot number 3, we also read snapshot 1 and 2, etc. This is to answer the question, why am I waiting? If the queue was pretty long, then snapshot 1 and 2 actually reflects what the packet just come into those, which packets just came into the queue. So if we check snapshot 1 and 2, we kind of know what's the cause for the microbursts. We can also take action. For example, if we know this is the particular packet that's causing the microburst because it belongs to a flow that's having a large fraction of packet inside the queue, maybe we can now decide to reroute this packet or to drop this packet or just take some other actions. Finally, we also try to clean the oldest snapshots. So in this case, we're cleaning snapshot number 4. The reason is the snapshots are swapping really quickly. The time window are really tiny here. We have to use the time window as small as like 1 millisecond or even shorter to match the time dimension of microburst. So it may be not, if we use something outside the data plane, for example, a controller or a server to try to clean the data plane sketch, it will be not fast enough. So once we clean the snapshot, we can use it in the next time window. So 1 millisecond later, we can swap the role of all these snapshots. Now we can write into the now empty snapshot number 4. So this is basically the data structure And with that, we can answer which particular flow is having a large fraction of packet inside the queue. Now we try to test whether conquest can actually help us mitigate the bursty flows. We built a testbed with a P4-enabled bare Fruitofino programmable switch that can process packet at terabits per second and using our customized P4 program. The prototype only 4 snapshots, but that's good enough for us to analyze. We artificially built a bottleneck case where there's a 100G link feeding to the switch and getting out from the 10 Gbps link. So it's very easy to be congested. We have a sender here who sends 1 million TCP flows into the switch, but using only 20% utilization for the receiver side. And the receiver will just acknowledge those packets. The sender also sends synthetic microbursts. It will send bursty flow into the switch to cause congestion. We perform a test that tries to use conquest to allow us to do flow-based congestion management. So basically, whenever there's a microburst or queue is really long, we'll find out which flow is causing trouble for everyone else. And we'll only try to slow down those particular bursty flows. We'll add an ECN tag or early congestion notification tag that will trigger the congestion management for the TCP flow. We compare with a baseline where we just add ECN to all the flows if the queue is getting longer. Well, this is normally the case for most routers in today's network, or maybe they'll just drop packet without using ECN. So our result shows that using flow-based ECN enabled by conquest indeed can reduce the flow completion time, which is a key performance metric for network performance in this kind of tests. So here in the x-axis was the size of the bursty flow size. Basically, we send larger and larger microbursts. And in y-axis was the flow completion time. As we can see, with larger and larger bursts, the workload flow actually finish slower and slower. With conquest, we can actually see an improvement as much as 11% in the performance of the workload flows. If we look deeper, we can see that the queue remains much shorter if we're using conquest and flow-based ECN. So the x-axis shows that as the burst started, and y-axis was the size of the flow, size of the queue, sorry. So we can see that in the baseline case, the queue goes long, and then we start to throttle the flows. And in y-axis, we precisely throttle the bursty flow such that queue always remains short. So basically, we can provide a lower latency and lower jitter for our clients. So the people who are watching the video or playing games online will be happier. But then there's a very critical problem. Not all devices are programmable today. So for example, in AT&T's network, we have like tens of thousands of different devices. Maybe only a dozen of them support P4 programmability. But we already need queuing analysis right now. We are not replacing all those devices overnight, but we still want to know what's happening in the queues tomorrow morning. What can we do? Well, we propose an interesting solution here. We'll use tapping links. We'll send a copy of all the traffic from a particular device we're debugging. So for example, if this particular legacy device is suffering from microbursts and we want to analyze why or which flow is causing trouble, we'll just send a copy of all the packets to this particular switch to the P4 switch next to it. So when the packet shows up, we'll send a copy to the P4 switch and we remember, hey, this packet showed up at this particular timestamp. Later on, when the packet comes out of the egress port, we'll see it again. So we'll see a copy again. And remember, this particular packet showed up again at a different timestamp. By subtracting these two timestamps, we can know the queuing delay experienced by this packet. And we can perform all this other equivalent, all exactly the same analysis on conquest using this P4 switch. So after that, we can analyze what's happening in this legacy network device queue, no matter how old it is, no matter what programmability supports. And fortunately, by the way, in AT&T's network, we have a bunch of tapping links lying around for other applications. So it's actually quite easy for us to set up these tapping links. We try to analyze queuing in a particular test switch, a Cisco testing switch using a programmable switch. Here we can show that the delay we measured actually can closely match the actual delay reported by the legacy device. Remember that I said that the legacy device only reports queuing statistics every second. So here, every blue cross was like every report of queue length. And the red line was one measured by the P4 switch. We can see that we can accurately track the queuing delay. Later on, if we use this measurement result to analyze queuing, it will also accurately help us track which flow was causing trouble for others. So we send some bursty flow ourselves and see if we can catch them. We get over 90% accuracy. This setup has been deployed in 2 different real-world networks to catch microbursts in the wild. In Princeton University, we have an initiative called P4 Campus to allow us to use P4 programmable switches to analyze queuing issues and other performance issues in the campus network. We successfully debugged one mysterious packet dropping issue in one of our switch. Well, it was trying to serve the neuroscience department's traffic, so I hope they now have better performance. At AT&T Labs, we try to use the same tapping setup we have to analyze queuing and microburst characteristics in AT&T's backbone network. It allows us to see the microburst and bursty characteristics of our traffic in the United States. So in summary, today we present Conquest. It's a data structure that uses round-robin snapshot idea to analyze queuing in the data plane. It allows us to identify flows contributing to the long queuing delay or microburst in real time. The real-time analysis enables us to take action directly if we are using the programmable switch in production network. Even if we are not using programmable switch in production network yet, we can still perform non-invasive analysis for these networks using tapping links. It allows us to have valuable insights on what's happening in our queues, which flow are causing trouble, what's the frequency of microbursts, etc., without replacing our switches. So with Conquest, the Smurf can finally understand, why am I waiting in a long queue? That's all for today's talk. If you want to learn more, please search Conquest APNIC to find our blog talk on APNIC website. I'll be happy to take any question now. Thank you very much.
That's so great. Thank you, Xiaoxi. We really appreciate that very enjoyable presentation, and I particularly like pictures of Smurfs. Every presentation is improved by a picture of a Smurf. So I'd like to open the floor to questions and comments. As per usual, you can either raise your hand and ask a question by voice, which we really appreciate, or you can go to the Q&A box and pop in a question there. We actually do have a question that's in the chat box, but I'll read it out anyway. Yeah. In comparison with cake queuing discipline, which aspect does Conquest improve?
I would say we are not improving the queuing disciplines. We are trying to enable those in the new world of programmable switches and high-speed switches. We know that in 1980s or 1990s, there are a lot of research on queuing disciplines. However, in today's high-throughput programmable switches, often they only provide very simple queuing primitives, such as like strict priority of 8 different priorities, and that's all. And the reason was it's very hard to implement complicated analyzing queuing and implement complicated advanced queue management disciplines. The reason is we don't know which flow, the size of each flow in the queue. With Conquest, we can actually have an estimate of what's the size for every packet in the queue. So now it's possible for us to build upon Conquest to build such advanced queuing algorithms. We can try to adapt those old algorithms to use them in today's switches.
Thank you. And another question from Jonathan Exley. Did you find any particular applications or services that created microbursts?
Okay, so good question. So in our case, I believe we've found a perf_sorna server that's receiving a lot of bursts from the outside network. We are still debugging why perf_sorna was causing that. I believe maybe there's some scheduling issue because supposedly perf_sorna only scheduled 1 test at a time. So everything was just one flow. But in practice, we often observe like more than 50 flows coming simultaneously to our perf_sorna server. So maybe there's some cross synchronization issue that's causing the trouble. That's for our Princeton case. For AT&T case, I believe we didn't see any particular application sending the burst. It's just any kind of application in the network. So we're still trying to dig deeper.
Another question. Can we say that the Conquest data structure is similar to a sliding window in the data plane? Then the control plane is used to extract the snapshots, right?
That's a good discovery. So yes, we're actually trying to answer the query with a sliding window. The only difference is that the window size is varying. So in usual case, window size was fixed. And in our case, the window size is the queue length, which is changing. That's why we did multiple different snapshots and reading the variable length of snapshots. And for the second question, the snapshot was being read inside the data plane. We're not using the control plane. So a packet will try to read a few earlier snapshots in order to answer by itself. It will not be fast enough to use control plane to read the snapshots.
Fantastic. Any further questions, or else I'm going to invite Washif back to introduce the next. Oh, one final question in. Since you're having fixed size snapshots, how do you decide the size of the snapshot?
Oh, good question. So remember that every snapshot is corresponding to the a particular time window size. Say if you have like n different snapshots, and every snapshot have window size t, you want n times t to correspond to the maximum possible window, which is maximum possible queue length. So choosing the time window carefully and choosing the number of snapshots such that when you multiply them together, you get a maximum possible queuing delay you observe in your network. And finally, I have a question on Q&A. The P4 Tofino code is available. Not yet, but we'll try to release it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much again for a great presentation, Xiaoxi. I'm going to ask Washif to take over. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shen, and thanks, Sienna. So we have come to the final talk of the session. It's by Scott Holt, and his talk is on hardening production Linux infrastructure. And I'm just gonna hand it over to Scott.
Perfect. Thanks, Washif. Nice to meet everyone. My name is Scott. I'm a solutions engineer over at the CMD company. So as Washif mentioned, I just want to walk through basically, as he mentioned, hardening Linux infrastructure. So let me go ahead and present this out here. And cool, there we are. So basically, just want to walk through a couple different things that you can do for, and it says production Linux, but this is really any Linux environment, right? We're talking about, your Raspberry Pi at home. We're talking about your Arduino. You're talking about any Linux server or infrastructure that you want to set it up. And a big focus on cloud service providers, because a lot of customers that we're talking to and users that we're talking to of any platform have something like AWS free tier, Google Cloud. All of them have free tier options available these days, and Azure if you're trying to fiddle around with Microsoft. So let me just kind of get into it a little bit here. So the struggles of system hardening. So really when we're looking at it from a high level overview, it's all basic stuff. So the funny thing is about hardening Linux infrastructure is, nothing that I'm going to walk through today is really, news or anything along those lines, but it's all about, being able to tackle these issues, talking to your developers, talking to your team, and making sure that you understand everything. It all comes down to good asset management. It always does with everything. So when we talk about the struggle of system hardening, it's really, hey, where are these logs going? Why wasn't this already done? What have we done from a CI/CD process? Starting to get a handle on those things. So just a few things to consider when we start to move into this. So I've got about 5 different things I want to share out today and talk through. But the first thing is, determining your trust boundary. So understanding, what is hosted by a cloud service provider. So if we're talking about a CSP, are they managing everything? Are we talking about a SaaS-based application where all you really have to worry about is the data that you input to the system? Are we talking about a data center that you're hosting on site? So there's a big difference between all of these things, and understanding what is your problem, right? What is your data that you have to manage? What is the trust boundary that you have to manage? And then, even going all the way to, this bottom point is something that I think a lot of people start to struggle on is, checking up with the vendors and infrastructure providers and anyone else that you trust with your information about things like SOC 1, SOC 2, ISO 27001, any of the certifications that they make available, even on things that may not be things that you are necessarily concerned with, like FedRAMP or HIPAA or HIPAA High Trust. So the more certifications and the more proof that your vendors have, and there's a lot of other providers out there today, Security Scorecard, BitSight, some different solutions that do provide rankings for vendors as well. So you can have an understanding of what they're actually doing for security as well. So really just determining your trust boundary, and going back to what I mentioned before, this all kind of, there's a sliding scale, right? So when you're looking at the asset management side of the house, understanding is this a SaaS-based application? Do I just have to worry about the user information? Is it just business card data, or is there something more sensitive being pushed into there? Is it platform as a service? Is it infrastructure as a service? Determining that information, and we can see some of the different AWS hacks that happened the past year or two was largely like things like misconfigured access. access, or misconfigured S3 buckets in the case of Capital One hack. And a lot of times, Amazon kind of just throws their hands up in the air, right? It's up to the user, it's up to the infrastructure, the admin to actually manage this and actually take care of that. So they give you the car. It's up to you in terms of what you do with it. Now, getting things up to date is the other point that I want to address with this, and this is huge. I talk to everybody about this, and I work with Series A, very, very small companies that are sometimes just looking to get their Series A, and then I actually work with some of the largest Fortune 500, the Fortune 1 company. So just to give you an idea of the scale of some of these companies that I'm working with, and they all struggle with the same thing. It's getting things up to date, and there's a variety of different reasons. We can point fingers and we can complain and talk bad about each other, but really it comes down to the fact that developers are trying to do their job, and sometimes that requires things like certificate pinning or other things that may make it more complex to actually update systems, and some of the vendors and software that they're using sometimes may require older versions of Linux. You would think that with the lower amount of packages compared to Microsoft systems and the lower amount of CVEs, that'd be a little bit easier. But oftentimes those users who are working with Linux are really your power users, and they have a great understanding of the systems. They also understand that they don't want to update. So making sure that everything's up to date, and if there is reasons, understanding and set out compensating controls around those. So if you do have an older system, maybe you have AV deployed to it. If you do have to have an older system, maybe you have different firewall protections preventing ingress or egress to that infrastructure. So understanding your walled garden, putting access around it. And of course containers are definitely not exempt. This is coming up a lot more too, right? Kubernetes, Docker containers, people are starting to play around with container infrastructure, and we're actually seeing kind of a mass migration to Kubernetes as a whole across the board. And the fact is that people don't understand this infrastructure, and updates are being pushed so frequently that even some of our more hardcore users don't really have a good understanding of what's going on with their Kubernetes infrastructure. So if you are going to start to go that direction, be very aware and up to date in terms of what you're deploying, and making sure that everything is up to date as well. So going back to what I was saying before, Patch Tuesday, Exploit Wednesday, Linux tends to be the forgotten about. So the forgotten about infrastructure as far as Microsoft, as far as Microsoft servers, endpoints, even macOS endpoints. There's less of a prevalence and less of a concern with some of the different things. Then the fact is with the open source development, they don't actually need to. There is no reverse engineering required. So the Linux kernel is out there. People understand the Linux kernel, and that is a good thing. And that also provides some different challenges associated with that. So again, going back to what I was mentioning earlier, your power users have a deep, deep understanding of this infrastructure and how it works, and that is also including your attackers. You can consider attackers also power users as well. So then from there, we want to make sure that we tune network interfaces. So sometimes that's getting locally onto the box and just running sudo netstat, plant 2, and sometimes that's getting on there and running different commands and getting an understanding of what's actually running on that infrastructure. So getting local access to that. A big thing that you'll be able to do is start to identify ad hoc procedures as well. So going back to that cert pinning thing I was mentioning earlier, if you understand the ad hoc procedures, they're far, far less dangerous. If you understand, hey, this is why my user runs as root, or this is why my user runs as a service account, they're logging in because there's a problem with the release and they just want to fix it. That's not as big of a deal as if you're seeing these execs and you're seeing these different users escalating privileges and not understanding what the system is around that as well. And you start the more things you can turn off, the better as well. So going back to that, if we have an understanding of what the outliers are, we can start to turn off everything else that users are accessing and running, and starting to get more towards immutable infrastructure as well, if we can. Now, The other thing is, CIS standards. There's all sorts of different standards that are out there, but a lot of the different CSPs, if you aren't going with, Google or Amazon, actually have, pre-packaged CIS hardened machines that you can go with as well. So you're not starting from scratch. There's a lot of different guides. There's a lot of information on resources and places like Stack Overflow for starting and spinning up infrastructure that is already hardened. So, take advantage of the information resources that are available online, and definitely take advantage of any tools that are available within your cloud service provider as well. If you are paying for a service like AWS, you should take advantage of tools like CloudStream and CloudTrail and other solutions that actually come there as well for logging and access to the console and things of that nature, because you're already paying for it, right? Might as well. And then obviously, determining the connection state in production. So getting back to what I was saying a second ago, if you have local access to that machine, get on the machine, run these commands, be able to understand and pull this list, and the better, the more you understand what's coming from this already, the better off you will be. Then, configuring logging. So I mentioned earlier, users running execs. So you're not going to be able to tail logs. You're not always going to be able to access a machine locally. So the most important thing is setting up centralized logging. And oftentimes it's going to be like audit beats. So audit beats, file beats, send it off to Elasticsearch, then send it to Elk, start to run through the logs there, go through the access. There's some kind of no nonsense things here, like time sync the logs, right? If you're going to keep everything in UTC, which most of the teams I work with do, keep everything in UTC. Don't make it as non-complex as possible. Make it very, very simple. So and then from there, understand the verbosity of logging that you need. Oftentimes it's very, very verbose for different compliance standards, but the more you can slim that down, the better. So the more information you can kind of slim that down to, whether it's focusing on execs, PIDs, PPIDs, there's a lot of information that's going to come out of a system like AuditD, and the more you can kind of fine grain and filter that down, the better. So look through it in Elasticsearch, make Kibana dashboards that make you happy, and just get a better understanding of that information that's coming through, but without completely giving yourself a headache. And yeah, standard logs are terrifying. So the more you can get away from them, the better. Now, the final thing, this is number 5 here. So just harden authentication and authorization. So we talked about hardening the system, but the access points, the entry points are the most important part, right? So if you set up different types of access and authorization, you limit your exposure significantly, and understand how your users are initiating connections to this machine, whether it's through SSH, SSM, whether it's a Cloud Shell in GCP or AWS, and then also on top of that, being able to if you have something like Telnet open, but now on top of that, you need to start to move to a standard. So, introduce things like SSH certs, key management, and those types of things. Getting away from, I still see this a lot, and it's it's really a little bit terrifying. But password connection for SSH, and then also configured lots of shared user accounts as well. So maybe you have an SSH cert deployed, but it doesn't really matter because all your users authenticate as EC2 or Ubuntu. So it's kind of out the window there in terms of, and that crumbles your foundation for some of those other things that we talked about. So if all your users are authenticating as a shared user, then you don't have the logging is completely useless, and some of the other things are useless. Setting up different policies around what users can do is useless. So it all really comes down to understanding the entry points, access points, and how users are actually interacting with the infrastructure. And then you can start to layer on some cool things like multi-factor auth. There's PAM modules available from Duo, YubiKey, which is open source, Google Authenticator, which is open source. So lots of cool options there. And those PAM modules are totally free. So I highly suggest YubiKey because hardware tokens are great, but up to you in terms of how you want to do that. So just in summary, right, determine your trust boundary, make sure everything's up to date, things that we already know, minimize to network connectivity as much as possible, right? We don't really want our systems interacting with the internet if we can avoid it. Configuring audit and logging capabilities, so centralize your logging, get that logging off the box, because any logs in the box, bash history or otherwise, cannot be trusted. They can be manipulated, changed, tweaked by a user, any user who has root level access to that machine. And then we want to implement authentication authorization. So in my opinion, one of the most important parts of this is making sure that any user who does interact with their infrastructure is a trusted user. And we can do that through things like multi-factor authentication or some of the different options that are available there as well. So wanted to stop there. Any questions or any points that like clarification on?
Thank you, Scott. That's awesome. We actually do have a question from Mick MW of the putting his money under the bed fame. The Centre for Internet Security offers hardening scripts for members to harden their Linux and Windows servers. Would you use their scripts for updates to comply with ASD's ISMs?
I'm ASD's ISMs. I'm not sure I am following all of these different acronyms here. Sorry, it's a little bit late for me over here too, so I apologize.
I think that ASD is Australian Signals Directorate.
Okay. Yeah, you know what? I'm not familiar with it, so I'm not sure I could comment on that with any type of authority. But I have looked at the Australians. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's like the top 8 for Linux security or something along those lines. And those are fantastic. And it's a little bit different than CIS, but it pretty much is the same thing, right? CIS, we use NIST over here in the US as well. And all these standards are fairly similar when you start to really break it down, the nuts and bolts. So, I'm not sure I'd be the right authority to speak on that, but I do think that a lot of the options that they provide are great for hardening your systems.
And Jonathan Brewer asks, how can we get remote syslog in the instance connectivity if the instance connectivity is interrupted?
Yeah, so definitely, I mean, in that case, you kind of have to set up you have to set up some type of local logging option, and then, right, like I was saying earlier, you can't really trust that information. So, what we do with CMD is set up like a fallback. So we have fallback data that gets stored on the device in an encrypted state. But there's probably different ways to set that up as well outside of that.
Super. Well, thank you so much, Scott. And I also want to thank Washi for being our moderator of the second technical session. I have the privilege of introducing David from APNIC, who is going to be the moderator of the panel that's coming up. So I'll hand over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Sienna. Good to be here. Thanks to everyone for sticking around for the last session of the last NFH for this series. This afternoon, we'll be doing a panel discussion on the rise of the IXP. We had a brief discussion in the office a couple of weeks ago about why IXPs are the way they are. And we thought we'd make a good panel discussion, a bit of a departure from the usual COVID bleakness. So on the panel this afternoon, we have Narelle Clark from IAA. I have Jerome Chiwakuko from PNG IXP, Salesh Kumar from Fiji IXP, and Tom Paseka, who's representing New Zealand IX. Thanks a lot for coming this afternoon. I'm going to start the first question. This is probably more directed, I guess, at Tom and Narelle, but why is there such a flood of IXPs within our market, particularly in Australia and New Zealand? Why do some places have so much trouble getting one started? So I guess, Narelle, we'll go to you first.
Okay, thanks for that, David. Well, my guess would be that it has a lot to do with the high price of transit that we pay across the area, across the region, and also the fact that a lot of our nations or our ISPs within our nations have had to carry the cost of those big links from the bigger markets, i.e. Europe and the USA. So it's that huge cost of the international bandwidth plus our local high cost of transit coming together to mean that if we can interconnect together at the lowest possible rate, then our costs are transformed all round.
And what about you, Tom? How do you see it over in New Zealand?
Yeah, I think it's not just in New Zealand, but it's actually something we're seeing all around the world, is that we're seeing more and more IXs pop up, especially in secondary markets. Just recently, we launched in Christchurch a couple of weeks ago, actually. And we're trying to do that to help promote the regional exchange of traffic. But this is something that we're seeing kind of around the world, is that these IXs are popping up to help support exchange outside of the major hubs.
Cool. So over to Salesh. Fiji IX are relatively new in the space as well. You guys had a fairly unique experience in that you had really good buy-in from basically all of your local telcos. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Hi, Salesh here.
Hi, Salesh.
Yeah, actually, we have a fairly new IXP, and thanks Tashi for coordinating all the way through. Basically, initially there was a lack of interest by the operators, but due to all this competition and things coming up, and also like operators, they had bilateral peerings. So normally large ISPs, they would like to establish bilateral peerings, and since they have reach, also large ISPs, they want to dominate, getting on CDNs and building content. So David, sorry, I couldn't get much of your initial question.
So from my understanding, once the IXP was stood up, the pretty much all of the players all joined in from day one. There wasn't a lot of pushback from the incumbents.
Yeah, actually, Fiji, they didn't had much pushback because we engaged a regulator as well, and they were quite supportive, and so we managed to actually get the IXP rolling.
Excellent. So, question for Jerome, I guess, as I know Nectar are pretty heavily involved in PNG with the PNG IX. How important is having someone like Nectar being involved at that level for you guys? I think you're on mute, Jerome. There we go.
In case of PNG, NICTA has really has helped the PNG community to all the players together, and it was a key important play that NICTA played in forming the IXP, because without their help and perseverance in gathering all the players, probably this PNG IXP won't be in production. So yeah, it's very helpful with the help of a government entity that to help players like here in PNG because of the competition. So during the initial stage, as I remember when we had the first couple of meetings, most players were there, but as soon as as soon as the ball was rolling, it's only a small amount of players are joining, but with the help of NICTA, we were able to make it eventually happen. But it does took us 2 years from the first meeting before we were able to launch the IX.
Yeah. It's a very long road from what I've been told. Yes.
Yeah.
You guys also still have sort of not connectivity issues, but you're a bit different to other markets that I've worked in terms of connecting back into the IX. So you guys do a lot of point-to-point radio and the like to actually get into the peering. Is that correct?
Yeah, we use point-to-point because wireless radios. One thing is fiber is a bit expensive. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. So.
And most of our for my company, we normally provide a wireless point-to-point for our last mile.
Yep. Cool. So, Norel, because this is always a contentious one, especially in Australia. Why don't the incumbents play nicely with exchanges?
Yes. Well, you see, the incumbents see everybody else as, well, let's not call them the incumbents. Let's call them the big four. So the Australian market is dominated by a very small number of players who have something like 70% of the home and business internet services. And they basically see the rest of the marketplace as their customers. And if you want to interconnect with them, they just want you to pay money. And they see it as an unchangeable situation from their perspective. So unless you're as big as they are, then they're not going to peer with you. And they generally won't peer without a regulatory intervention.
So that brings me on to my next question. Should the regulators be involved? Should they enforce it? I mean, there are other markets where that is the case. Doesn't necessarily work successfully, but it does happen.
Look, that's a really good question. And I have to admit, it's not one that I've really fully thought through at this stage. So I'd like to reserve that one.
Okay.
Certainly if my board said to me, Narelle, get out there and go and demand it in the marketplace, and the membership were the ones demanding to the board that this happen, I'd certainly get out there and advocate it strongly and hard. But at this stage, we'd certainly welcome the big players within our internet exchanges. Absolutely. And it would really transform the marketplace, certainly, if they did.
Oh, without a doubt. Having recently just come from the operator market in the last couple of months, having to buy transit just for the sake of connectivity, it's a bit of an annoyance. So, Tom, I just want you to put your Cloudflare hat on for a little second. How important are IXs to the likes of Cloudflare and other CDNs?
IXs are an incredibly important part of our interconnection scope. Cloudflare is connected to more IXPs than any other network in the world, I believe. Maybe number 2 or number 1. I'm competing with someone else for the most connections. But the IXPs are a critical part of our infrastructure. And we connect to them in 100 or nearly 100 countries around the world. Continuing, sorry, just quickly on your previous point about the regulation, it's a really tough topic to touch because as a whole, the internet shouldn't be regulated and interconnection shouldn't be regulated. There is a good business practice that happens when people can buy connectivity, and you don't want to stranglehold the market. There's very few markets around the world where interconnection is actually regulated. And those markets actually have the most expensive interconnection in the world. So I think it's very good to kind of leave that open, but it's good to nudge the providers along if they're being anti-competitive.
Right. That was probably more the direction I was heading in, so that, it's, but yeah, an interesting viewpoint from you. So Salesh, how does content distribution work for you guys in terms of getting the content providers into those smaller markets? How is that shared out around the IX?
Thank you, David. Actually, before we had IX, we had only transit links, but large ISPs, they are able to get content caches, likes of Google, Facebook, Akamai, and but it's quite challenging for small ISPs to get content caches. So also when we have IX, the main question that comes in is, who pays for getting those content to the CDN? So it's always a question, like commercials come in, and that's the time when, the question comes, who pays for the transit for those CDN? So I guess, that is a good discussion to be made and comments made, like, because we currently we have IX, but operators, they always run when that question comes in. So I don't know how other like bigger IXs, the CDN providers come into big IXs.
Well, maybe Narelle can answer how that actually works for the likes of IAA and IXOs.
Sorry, could you, I missed that question. Could you repeat it, please?
Celeste was asking how the larger IXs manage to get the eyeball networks connecting, CDNs.
So we've been really lucky that I think given the size of our exchanges, they've just wanted to be part of this. And to deliver the content most efficiently across Australia, you really do need to appear at the peering points. And we have been really, I think, lucky in some ways, but we've also tried to build those relationships with the various CDNs so that the content providers want to be with us. And that's great. So we've tried to make it as easy for them as possible, but dealing with their legal departments and coming up with agreements and so forth that work for everybody is still tedious.
Yeah.
They've got big, strong law firms that like to they like to treat not-for-profit, independent, carrier neutral service providers as evil vendors that are likely to steal from them. But no, it's really, folks, come to us, we'll play nicely, we'll help you get your content out to people. And that has meant that not only do we get the likes of the big streaming services, but we've also had some other internet service providers on there, like education players and other operators.
Cool. I've got a couple of questions from the floor, so we'll pop through those. This is from Chi Hu. How important is it for IXPs to have CDNs on their networks, which I think we've covered? And is shared CDN services an attractive service to the small IXP participants? So I guess, Jerome, that sort of probably is what you guys are doing over in PNG, and I guess Celeste to a degree as well. Do you want to have a quick talk about that?
What was the question?
So the shared CDN services, so different caches in different providers and then repropagating those through your IX?
In the case of PNG IX, we currently have two CDNs in place. One of the CDNs is directly peering with its IXP members. For that is we use it for the other CDN. It's so only one provider is feeding the cache. So with that provider, we are billed monthly based on our consumption.
Okay. Another question. This is from Mark. Does AU and NZ IXPs ever look to interconnect in the near future, like with cross-peering their route servers with the help of BGP community policies? This is done in the Euro-IX region by a few IXPs. Which one of you two want to answer that one?
I'd like to hear Tom's answer for that as a board member over in NZIX. I think it needs to also be stated though first that IAA actually, under IX Australia, actually provides the operation services to NZIX. So we operate both.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to have localized IXs. I think the majority of traffic exchange should always be targeted to be done locally. So cross-linking the IXs in a single fabric, I think, is a bad idea. But giving the members of the IXs the opportunity to connect from one to the other is something which is more interesting. And I think IIA does quite a bit of this today. So if you take a port in Sydney, you could also get extended to the Melbourne LAN. Now it doesn't bridge the two LANs, but you get access to both of them.
Yeah. Question for Tom from Mick MW. Do you support network neutrality?
Network neutrality is like a Rorschach test. You can throw it on a wall and ask someone what they think, and you'll get a different answer from everyone. So it's really difficult to give a clear thing. In general, yes, we support open access to the internet and equal access for everyone.
Question from me. Should the bigger IXPs help the little guys? Whether it be in technical resources, product donation. You know, you might have a couple of Volt Nexus 5K switches lying around. How open are the other IXs to this?
So putting on another hat that I'm wearing, which is the APIX, the Asia Pacific Internet Exchange Association. And I think our charter is really to help other IXPs by lending the knowledge and experience that the existing IXPs have in the region. And so I think that that's really important to help new IXPs grow, not just from financial or hardware, but from practices and operational best practices.
Yeah, cool. Excellent. Yes, Narelle?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments on there. We'd be really happy to assist. And the relationship that we currently have with NZIX, indeed to provide them with operational services, is one that I would love to be able to offer throughout the whole rest of the region. Now, obviously, that's, really not much more than a thought bubble in my head. It's not a solid marketing plan at this point in time, but I would love to be able to work more closely with the other IXs in the region. You know, to us, it is really important that we support our neighbours and friends around the region. To share what to help grow the network, to grow the community. It's something that I'm very, very, very passionate about, and people, throughout my career will know that I've always been available to help and support and mentor people within the industry, regardless. Especially your women folks.
Excellent.
Yeah, and actually, I wouldn't mind just jumping back to the question that was made about the networks sharing across the ditch and perhaps across Australia. Tom made the point that it's very important that IXs work as community centres so that we can keep local traffic local. I think that is a really important thing. But we do in IX Australia offer the opportunity for extended reach, so that if somebody presents at the Perth location, they can actually peer in Sydney or peer in Melbourne. So we do offer that around the place. We don't actually offer that across the ditch because we're really not across the ditch, meaning across the Tasman Sea, for those of you who are not familiar with the Aussie and Kiwi vernacular here. We don't offer it across the Tasman Sea because really we're not in the market for providing international bandwidth. That costs big bucks. And, if we had to offer that sort of service, then it would need to be cost effective. And I think you can probably buy it cheaper from other providers rather than us. So I don't think it would be a good use of members' funds.
No, fantastic. We got any more questions? I think we're pushing the time bubble here as well. Can't see anything else here. I've got one more. Other services such as VLL, VXC, so virtual lease lines, virtual cross connects. Obviously, when you've got multiple POPs, this has to make sense. But what about between providers? So not just doing bilat peering or multilat peering. What about allowing everybody else to do their own thing? within that switch fabric?
I'm a little torn on this point because the IX's role is to facilitate interconnection. But if you're starting to offer things like VLLs, you're going to end up competing with your members. And as Narelle just mentioned, like someone can probably offer it cheaper and better than the IX can, because the IX is focused on its key mission of the internet exchange. So it's not necessarily in the best interest of the IX to start offering services like those.
Okay. Narelle? Because I mean, IA do offer these services.
Yeah, we do. We do. And we have traditionally also offered co-location and some transit services. That has been a historical thing that has come out of our history, in that we were started by a group of small ISPs in Western Australia trying to interconnect with the rest of Australia. So they were sharing costs to get to everywhere else. And it really did grow into the thing that we have today. I can actually share a screen with a map of our network if you want to see it.
Yeah, sure. Throw up. You've got it handy?
Yep, always. So that should have come up nicely for you, has it? Indeed. So here you can see that, we started over here in Western Australia with a small presence, and have basically grown across the country. And I have a small picture here of the Tasman Sea, or the ditch, as we happily call it. So yeah, you can present at any one of these exchanges and take up a VLL or extended reach to any of our other points, apart from within New Zealand. And we are also available now on PCCW's Console Connect platform, and looking to grow that and to grow other relationships with providers like that as well.
Cool. One more question. Which of the panelists IXPs does remote peering with a reseller program? Is this...
Yeah.
This yeah. Bit of a tricky question, this one, because it sounds very much like virtual IXP to me.
Well, we have that relationship now with PCCW.
Yeah.
And that could well grow soon in other locations, to other forms. But again, we're assessing that on a case-by-case basis.
Excellent. I think that's pretty much all we have, and I'm pretty sure I've stretched the friendship on our time here. I'd like to thank everyone for their time this afternoon. Thanks, Tom, Narelle, Salesh, and Jerome. And I'm sure we'll all be in touch very shortly.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Sienna. I hand it back to you.
Talk to you all.
Thank you so much, everyone. And that's a wrap, folks. Thank you to everyone who joined us today, particularly the presenters, panelists, and the Oceania NOGS IAA and PC volunteers. I'm briefly going to hand over to Tony Smith from APNIC for a vote of thanks.
Thanks, Sienna. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know my name, I'm Tony Smith, and I'm the Communications Director at APNIC. Thankfully, you haven't had to hear from my voice during the past 4 Networking from Home events, but I wanted just to pop up today to pass on some very well-deserved thank yous. The Networking from Home idea was created with the blessing of our NOG friends to help fill the gap left behind by the cancellation of many NOG events in our region due to COVID-19. And judging by the response we've seen from the community, I think we can say it's helped make a difference. We've had more than 1,100 people attending the 4 events so far, so thank you very much. It's worked, I think, because of the effort, support and trust that exists between the NOGs in the region and APNIC. And on behalf of APNIC, I would like to thank all the NOGs who took part for their support. APNIC has always been a very proud supporter of network operator groups, and we will continue to support them as best we can. I know all of you who arrange the NOGs do so in your own time as volunteers and on top of your very busy day jobs, which probably get a lot busier during the pandemic. So whether you helped on the program committee or by presenting or joining a panel or spreading the word about networking from home or simply turning up and enjoying the show, thank you very much. Thanks also goes to our networking from home supporters, ISOC, ICANN, IAA, thanks again, Narelle, and Apricot as well. There's been a small band of people here at APNIC as well who've helped make this a reality, and I'd like to pass on my appreciation to them as well. Obviously, we've had Jeff's great presentations and Sienna's excellent work in the front of house, But behind the scenes, there's also been big contributions from Sunny, Tashi, Arth, Blondine, Chehu, Jansen, Dale, Haral, Patrika, David, and many more. So to you all, thanks for help bringing this event to the region. And finally, to all of you who are still watching out there, if you've attended one of the events or came to them all, we thank you for your support and we hope that you enjoyed them. And that's all from me. Please stay safe and we look forward to seeing you all again as soon as we possibly can.
Thank you, Tony. The presentation slides and session recordings will be published on the NFH website shortly, and that will mean that all 4 networking from home events, all of the sessions are recorded there. We'll shortly be sending out our final event survey. Please do let us know how you think today went, and feel free to suggest improvements for the future, because APNIC 50 is fast approaching. It's a totally virtual experience this time round. If you like what you've heard here, you'll love 3 days of technical talk, all free and open to anyone. You can register at conference.apnic.net/50. Thank you very much again, and we look forward to further collaboration in the future. Stay well, stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.